Hi, I'm Dr. Keith Graham from the School of Teacher Education at National Taiwan Normal University. Welcome to my office hours. All right, Selena, we're episode 2 of our adventures together.
Okay.
What's the question today?
Okay. So, before my questions today, I want to tell you a story. I have a younger cousin who her health class at school is taught bilingually. And however, during the final exam, the test was entirely in English. Like all the organs on the test is all about English.
Can I ask what city this school is in?
Taipei.
Okay, I'm not going to ask for the school.
Oh, okay.
And what grade level is this?
I thought it's 7 or 8. I cannot remember.
You don't know your cousin that well.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me just recap. So we're talking about bilingual school in Taipei.
Yeah.
We're talking about health class, junior high school,
Yeah.
and the final exam
Yeah.
was all in English?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And she told me that she couldn't really understand the questions. And so she just guessed and ended up she scores like 50. Yeah. And she even happily tell me that, hey, sister, I got 50. She got a half of the answers right by guessing. So she was really proud of that.
Okay.
Yeah. So today questions is about in a case like this, what advice or suggestion that you want to give the health teacher or even my cousins?
So let me address the teacher. Okay. So I guess the first thing we have to say is this. You should not be giving a full exam in English in a bilingual school in Taiwan. That should not be happening.
Yeah, can you explain more why we cannot give student all English exam paper?
Well, I think it starts with the policy. The Ministry of Education, 2 years ago, they sent a notice, an official notice, to all the cities. And basically, one of the items on there said you should not be assessing English in your bilingual class. Now, there are different interpretations of it. So we have different professors saying that that means different things. But nonetheless, no matter where a professor stands on what that particular phrase means, I can't imagine anybody that I know at this university or other universities that would think an all English final exam in a health class was a good idea.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk more about why it's not a good idea. Why else is it a bad idea? Well, first thing, students have to learn content in Mandarin in Taiwan. It makes no sense for a school to do all English in Taiwan. Why? Because if school is supposed to set them up for success in society, you need Mandarin in this society.
Yeah.
Even if you have a group of students where their English is really good, you should still be using Mandarin in your classrooms, not because they need the Mandarin for supportive purposes, but because it's important for them to engage in learning in Mandarin. And that extends to assessment, because if we're teaching something, we should be assessing it as well. Assessment matters. We've got to know how students are doing. Are they mastering the material? And then using that information to decide what happens next instructionally. I think that also brings a problem with what your cousin experienced. They should not be tested all in English. They should not be learning only in English. It is a bilingual class. In a perfect world, a bilingual class means that the student is learning through both languages,
Indeed.
that they have opportunities to learn through English and opportunities to learn through Mandarin. Now, in some interpretations of the policy, the assessment should still happen in Mandarin in that situation. And that's fine. The policy is the policy. I think if I could, in a perfect world, if I had students that had generally good English proficiency across the board, everyone had some English, enough English to learn through the subject, then I would expect that in that type of classroom, students would engage in learning, engage in activities in both languages, and then they would be assessed in both languages.
Yeah.
But that's slightly against policy. So I want to be careful how I say that, because I think the interpretation of the policy that most professors take is that assessment and grades should not be, the English should not come in that part. That they can engage in English learning activities in class, but when it comes to assessment, it should stay in Mandarin. Okay, so I'll stick to that for now. There's one other problem with this scenario. So, do you think your cousin knew the material?
Knew the material.
If we gave her that same assessment in Mandarin, do you think she would have gotten a 50 and had to guess on everything?
Yeah, I think she will, because
You think she will?
she will go beyond 50.
Okay.
Because like some terminology in that exam paper, yeah, I have seen that exam paper.
Yeah.
Like some organs, the English name of some organs. Even I'm a college student, I even don't know what is that. So I think if that the exam paper can turn into like Mandarin, I think it won't be better.
So that's the problem.
Yeah.
That's really policy, fine, policy. My vision of what a bilingual classroom looks like. We can say, you know, people always say, oh, the policy is unrealistic. And then everyone loves to say, oh, professors, they're unrealistic. They live in their ivory tower and dream of unrealistic things. And that's fine. You can criticize me for that. But the heart of the problem is what you just said. Why shouldn't you do that assessment all in English? Because the assessment wasn't actually testing anything that it needed to.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume that that health teacher was giving a final exam as a way to know whether students had mastery of the health concepts or not. And if your cousin has mastery of those health concepts, but language was the problem, language was the reason they didn't do well on the test, well, then the assessment isn't actually collecting the data you need. Because here you have your cousin who presumably does have knowledge of these health things, but it was the problem with the exam that prevented it from actually being collected. And so we have basically an invalid assessment. I don't want to get into, concepts of assessment validity and stuff, but that's an invalid assessment. It does not do what it's supposed to do. And the consequences of that are quite negative. It's negative for your cousin because she got a 50, although she seemed more excited that, hey, I got a 50. Typical junior high school student. But it could have been worse. She could have been like, oh my God, I can't believe I got a 50.
Yeah.
My life is ruined. Some high achievers would feel that way. But that number is useless for that teacher. That teacher's going to think, oh, well, your cousin doesn't know the health material. Well, that's not true. That scenario is hugely problematic.
I think that exam paper is testing what student English proficiency.
And that's specifically what the policy statement tells you not to do. Because the way it's worded is, I forget the exact Chinese, but it says, if you translate it directly, you should not be assessing their English proficiency. So some people interpret that as you shouldn't be using English at all.
Yeah.
Some of the more conservative scholars of bilingual education. And then some that are a little bit more less conservative, want to push the English part more, say that, well, you can still, I guess their argument typically is, you can use English in formative assessments, but maybe not in summative assessments. You've got to assess content. And this very much was not assessing content, like you said. It sounds like they were assessing English. And that's, in the way we're practicing bilingual education in Taiwan, I think the way most people promote it, at least the people I'm around, I think we would not be supportive of that.
Yeah. It's kind of like testing, like vocabulary testing. So I think what the most important suggestions that you want to give to that teacher.
My most important suggestions. All right. I think that's a good way to wrap it up. So when you're thinking about assessment in bilingual education, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, does this assessment actually measure the content. That has to be number one. And typically what that means is that you are going to use Mandarin for assessment. Now, if you want your assessment to go beyond just using Mandarin, then the questions that are in English, you're going to have to measure them in Mandarin too. Not the same exact question. I'm not suggesting translate. So if question 1 is blah, 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 don't translate question 5 to English in exactly the same way. But they have to measure the same concept. So if your content has concept A, B, C, a question about concept A in Chinese and one in English, if you decide to do it that way, which again, as I said, may be against policy, so I'm not necessarily recommending that. But if you were to use both languages, you have to measure it in both languages because, think about it, if they get question 1 in Mandarin correct, but question 2 in English wrong, and it's the same concept, you at least know they know the concept and that there's a language issue. And if they get both right, cool, they've got both. So you've got to do it that way. But the last recommendation, so first, make sure it's a content-based assessment. If you're going to use English, make sure you measure the concepts in Mandarin too, so you can see if they know the content. And then 3, I think my recommendation here is about grading. I am of the position right now that in Taiwanese bilingual education, the grade needs to reflect the content, not the language. So even in that example assessment where you got the concept evaluated through question 1 in Chinese and then question 2 in English, maybe only calculating the grade with the Chinese ones might be the most appropriate. And then the English ones are kind of completion. Did you do it? I think those would be my recommendations. But ultimately, I think we have to be very, very careful with assessment in Taiwanese bilingual education because the job is to measure the content. If the assessment doesn't measure the content because of language or something else, then we're not assessing correctly. Yeah. That's it for today's episode. Thank you for attending my office hours. If you have a question about this episode or other things related to Taiwanese education or bilingual education, send me an email at kmgraham@ntnu.edu.tw. I'll see you next time.